the average Joe, regular civilians, operate on a 2 or a 3 level, meaning their adrenaline from 1 to 10. When they spike, they're at a 5 or a 6. Okay, so when something happens, they get overly excited. They're operating in a very short time at a 5 or a 6 in that scale 1 to 10. For most operators, we are trained to operate in those such an extreme environment that our norm is a 5 or a 6. So when we get to the operational adrenaline spikes, we're at a 10 or 11 or 12. We're superseding what that normal scale is. It's almost like you're just taught to run at full throttle all the time, and it's just a very intense awareness about us, I would say, is probably the best thing to say. That's Marines across the board. I'd say that's something that at boot camp they focus on, is just really amping up that throttle and making sure, the mission's all that matters, and know that, that's what you got to accomplish. You talk about everyday life in Iraq, and man, I remember there was a day when me and my unit were in, I think they were having some type of meeting in this local town or village, and we were all just kind of sitting around the Humvees, and one of the local elders invited us to come eat with them. And we talked back about all the imports and the goods. There's maybe a couple chickens and goats in the town, and yet they invite us in to eat, and they've got fresh cut produce and eggs on this platter, and we're all squatted down and just sharing a meal together. Some of us could kind of speak a little bit of Arabic, but it was just enough to kind of get us through. But just the feeling of gratitude that you would receive in moments like those, to the next day where, you just walk in and you feel hate. Just the presence of hate, on people's faces that don't want you there, and there's nothing you can do about it but just feel the hate. It's probably around July of 2009. They needed a senior operator or communications operator at Copy Beatty, so they pulled me and put me over there. So I had my job to make sure that communications were good between the FOB as well as the units that were leaving. At this point, this was just another day. We sent another group out, and my buddy was on the turret, which is a gunner for one of the Humvees. And you talk about upbringing and what you're taught from your parents and what you receive from your parents. And there was a 7-8-year-old kid that threw an RKG and severed my buddy's torso in half. The A driver and driver ended up with concussions, minor lacerations and stuff from the explosion. But you put everything in the back of your head because of what you have to deal with. But just the thought of staring at a 7 or 8-year-old kid, and having to put a muzzle in their direction is just it's a weird feeling. And at that point in time, you're sitting here watching what's taking place. You see what's in the kid's hands, and you're throwing tennis balls trying to warn people before you can ever fire a shot. And yet 9 times out of 10, you have to be reactive, not proactive. So, this is what we were dealing with all the time. Kids that are taught to hate, people that are hating because they're bred to hate us. And just an emotional nightmare, and I think just building those walls up and guarding yourself and losing that empathy is the only thing you can control. And just like for me, it caused the switch to just be permanently shut off and kind of lose touch with reality. That was kind of actually one of the last incidents. I think it was within the last month of being in Iraq. So from that point, it's just it's a rush trying to get everything put together, everybody packed up and in one spot and on flights and get back home. So for me, my EAS date, which is end of service, was actually within the period of time that most of the other people on the battalion were home on liberty. So everybody's back home seeing their families. I went straight back and had to rush to get checked out and out of the Marine Corps. So it's kind of crazy once I told everybody throughout my whole time in that I was going to re-enlist. I honestly thought that was what was going to take place. And once they found out I was getting out and EASing, it's crazy how much different they treat you, almost like they just write you off, right? So there's no support, no help, no evaluation as to how you're doing, like mentally, physically. It's literally, hey, we're getting you out of here, and good luck to you. So I got out in November of 2009, and basically that feeling of not knowing what to do that I had when I was a senior in high school, I was kind of resorting back to that, just 5 years older at that point. So after experimenting with a few different job opportunities, trying sales, service industry, I ended up going back into law enforcement, something that I knew, structure, rank, and started out with Rowlett Police Department. They put me through the academy, so it provided a salary while I was receiving the training, and then stayed there it was right at a year and a half. And, we talked about just putting center blocks up around my heart, right? And just having no empathy, no touch of reality, or lack of emotion for people. Law enforcement almost enhanced that. Did that mean that I was just a hard A that didn't help anybody out? No, that's not. I'm more talking about just the demeanor, my well-being, I guess, so to speak, was so just out of touch of reality. From relationships, my marriage was struggling, on the verge of losing the family that I've always wanted, because I came from that broken home and I always said I'd never do that to my family. I remember this conversation with a family that I was really close with. It was another Marine, but he was in a different unit in Camp Pendleton. And we went to church together and kind of just fellowship together and essentially brothers. But I mean, his wife was in that world as well. So she was really the only female that I was around in the Marine Corps that was just like a significant influence on my life. And I'll never forget having a conversation with her on the phone when I was at Princeton, and her just saying, "You're not the same. Like, you're not the Ben Holmes that we remember." And it wasn't until then, when I knew somebody that kind of knew me before the Marine Corps as well as after, that I was ever able to really put some stock into what was being said to me. A couple of incidents happened at Princeton Police Department that led me to be on administrative leave under investigation. And, looking back at it, I ended up being terminated, and I look at it as a badge of honor, because I was terminated for having integrity, for calling somebody out on something that was illegal and unprofessional. And during this time, they gave me a prolonged administrative leave, and I think I was on admin leave for over a year. But during that time, my wife put in some type of letter to Heroes and Horses, which is a veteran nonprofit foundation for vets with PTSD. Not even to my knowledge, she came to me one day while we're on admin leave. I'm on admin leave, and told me what was going on, that I got accepted to this program at the time. My wife and I had a very just heartfelt conversation about where we were at. If I was to see this through, which the accusations that were being thrown at me, there was potential for me to see jail time for a few different felonies. And my wife looked at me one day and she said, "Ben, did you do this?" And I'm like, "No, I didn't do this." And she was like, "Well, if you leave right now, it's going to look like you did it." So we're like, "Okay, let's see it through." So I went to the administration and said, "Hey, this is going on. Do you mind if I leave the state to go work on me a little bit?" They were okay with it. So I went through this program, and they the whole program's based on giving vets with PTSD, like repurposing them and allowing them to see, hey, there's purpose to your life. It's not over, because most of us have a servant's heart and want to do something that feels meaningful, and most of us lose that meaning or purpose when we get out of the military, and it's almost like we're just kind of kicked to the wind. They have these little support meetings, I guess, where throughout the program they'd pull you in and have conversations with you and try to challenge you, or see how you're doing. And I'll never forget this first conversation. I went in there and I expected to go in there and just them be like, dude, you're doing awesome. Like, you're killing everybody. You're doing everybody's work, packing all the animals. And went in there and got completely different. And they basically called me out about my ability to work with the team because I was so independent, so self-driven that, I guess that inability to work well with others was being overshadowed from the work that I was doing, if that makes sense. And to me, I was just like, well, I don't know what the hell's going on. This doesn't make sense. I'm outperforming everybody. Our next big pack trip, which we did 3 trips, all of them ranged in time, but this one was going to be, I think it was a 10-day or 2-week trip. So a lot more gear, a lot more packing that needed to take place, a lot more horses that we took up the country. And in Montana, I'll never forget, one of those mountain crests. I mean, we hit the peak, and I'm just kind of overlooking, and everybody's kind of sitting and talking. And at this point, we're all like, we're family. And everybody, I can remember everybody in my group had kind of all had a come to Jesus meeting, and essentially like just a heartwarming, felt emotional, uplifting point where they just realized that, life's not over, or, whatever their struggle may be. And here I am, unable to be broken, that's not working, outperforming everybody, not understanding like why I'm here. Clearly I'm supposed to be here. Like, God's put this path in front of me for some reason, and yet I can't understand why. And I looked out over, and it was like this, it's that switch that was broken just lifted on. I'll never forget that lack of emotion that I had for when my daughter was born. Hit me. That need, that care for family that I had my whole life just filled me back up. It was like God it's like he finally took the pack off my shoulders and said, rest. I'd carried this weight for so long. I'd been packed and ready to go. Train and train and train. And God just took that off of me and allowed me to let stuff in for the first time in years. And I finally realized, sitting there, that it was my time to get in touch with reality and understand that, I guess, whatever that I was fighting for and everything that I was trying to serve was still there and available to me, and that I needed to just let it in. And that was kind of my eye-opening moment, So that program for me was the next door. And, getting back and on administrative leave, they pulled me aside and did my final meeting and said, well, we're going to let you go. And all that risk of going to prison was gone. They said, look, we can't convict you of anything. You haven't done anything wrong. However, you were insubordinate towards your supervisor. So that's why I was terminated for insubordination. And for me, that ended my law enforcement career. So I was okay with that, standing up for what was right. And I truly feel like that's what God wanted me to feel and go through so that I could find Heroes and Horses, and Heroes and Horses led me here. I currently work for an individual that I was referenced to from a supporting family that helped Heroes and Horses. They needed a horse guy. We lived within an hour and a half of where this ranch was located. Had an initial meeting and meet and greet with him, and it went well. He was ready to hire me on the spot. So it's a high fence ranch, but we also have 26 head of horses. I mean, it's a dude ranch where we basically use what my boss has been able to just build and give back to the local community foundations that are around here, and just kind of love and pour on other people. I need reminders to kind of bring myself down to earth, to continue developing, relationships. And a horse is a constant reminder to kind of get my bearings together. And I mean, they read emotions, they read tension, just kind of that unspoken language. If you're mad, they're not going to want to be around you. They're gonna be able to feel that you're mad. And if you're happy, vice versa. They'll be playful if you're playful. There's no other animal in the world that is entirely based off of those sensations and triggers. So, my wife and I went through equine therapy together, and they basically just put us in the middle of a round pen with a horse that we were able to catch in the pasture, and would start talking about things that are emotional, things that, you don't always necessarily say how you're truly feeling, try to cover up. And it absolutely would just break down walls in the communication between my wife and I. If I started getting angry that a horse would walk off, or my wife, started getting upset, tried to hide it, the horse would try to comfort her. And, the therapist was able to try and read that and pause and kind of help us reflect. They're just an animal unlike anything else. I didn't realize how amped up I was all the time, how anxious I was. And, the horse reminds you of where you are currently. And if you're gonna go in to a pen with a horse anxious or amped up, the horse is gonna feed off that, and they're not gonna wanna be around you. They're gonna run off. It's gonna be, it's essentially gonna be hell trying to work with that horse. The horses that I'm surrounded by kind of emotionally keep me in check, because the minute I, focus on the mission of getting them all up and getting 15 horses saddled, is the minute that the horses aren't going to cooperate, and they're going to act squirrely because they're reading in on my intensity, my anxiety, or whatever it may be causes an emotional wreck for a horse. So I'm essentially hooked up to a lie detector all the time with these horses. They call me on my bullshit, so to speak, and tell me, hey, you gotta check yourself. There's this, untangible person that's out there, the person that I was when I was growing up, and who I always wanted to be. And then there's the reality and this constant struggle between the two. And I think more than anything, I just want my family to know, our actions, our journey, so to speak, is going to put you in a certain, create a certain person. And if you're not aware of what you're doing along the way, you're gonna reflect back and realize, you might have lost or you might have gained something from your initial intention. So I think for me, it's wanting them to understand that I have a servant's heart. Along the way in that service, I lost touch of why I was a servant to begin with, and to remember that you've got to constantly remind yourself of why you currently are where you are. I think the end goal, was to build a family for myself that broke the trend. You know, the trend in my family, everybody's divorced. I couldn't continue the life that I was moving forward with and continue my relationship with my wife. Like, it was pushing us in the opposite direction. So yeah, I might not be the soft, warm, kind-hearted individual that I thought I'd be when I was a kid, but my actions have always been geared towards my family. And I mean, that's really what matters to me, is, you know, my faith and my relationship with them. So